November 14th, 1944. A Tuesday evening at Camp Ridge, Kentucky. In the women's section of the prisoner of war facility, 58 German women stood in the mess hall line, their faces hollow from months of retreat across France. They had been captured 3 weeks earlier near the Belgian border, members of the German Women's Auxiliary Corps, who had served as radio operators, nurses, and clerks for the crumbling Wehrmacht. Now they waited for what they assumed would be meager rations befitting enemy prisoners. 23-year-old Emma Hartmann stood third in line, trembling as she clutched her metal tray. The former radio operator from Dresden had lost nearly 30 pounds during the final chaotic months of service. Her gray uniform hung loosely on her frame. She had eaten nothing but watery turnip soup and black bread for 4 months. The last time she'd seen real meat was in June at her sister's wedding, when her family had sacrificed a month's rations for a small pork roast. Behind her, 27-year-old Greta Zimmermann, a nurse from Stuttgart, whispered to 21-year-old Sophia Weber. They guessed what the Americans would serve: potato peelings in water, maybe grain mush. Certainly nothing substantial. They'd been taught that America was suffering from food shortages, that the capitalist system was collapsing. The line moved forward. Emma found herself before Corporal James Mitchell, a broad-shouldered young man from Iowa who managed the camp kitchen. He wore a genuine smile as he lifted his serving spoon. On her tray, he placed thick meatloaf, its surface glazed and glistening. Beside it, he added generous mashed potatoes, creating a crater he filled with rich brown gravy. On the other side, he spooned out buttered green beans. Emma stared at her tray, unable to move. This was more food than her entire family had eaten in a week. This was Sunday dinner. Behind her, she heard gasps. Then Anna Meyer, the youngest at 19, spoke the words they were all thinking. But it's Tuesday. Why are they giving us Sunday dinner on Tuesday? 6 months earlier, in May 1944, Emma had stood in a different line stretching down Prague Street in Dresden, waiting for weekly rations. She held her family's ration cards tightly, knowing these precious stamps represented the difference between survival and starvation. The war had transformed her beautiful city into a place of perpetual hunger. Her younger sister Margaret had fainted twice that month from malnutrition. Their mother had given up her own portions, so the girls could maintain strength for work. Emma's position with the Auxiliary Corps guaranteed slightly better rations, but even those had been cut 3 times since the beginning of the year. What they called bread was now more sawdust than flour. The margarine was gray and tasted of chemicals. Real butter had become a distant childhood memory. Greta Zimmermann's experience in Stuttgart had been worse. As a nurse at the city hospital, she'd watched patients die not from injuries but from simple starvation. The hospital had no food to give them. Children arrived with swollen bellies and stick-thin limbs. She'd held a 7-year-old boy's hand as he died, not from pneumonia, but because his body had nothing left to fight with. The ersatz coffee they drank was made from roasted acorns and chicory. It tasted bitter and provided no nourishment, but the hot liquid gave the illusion of sustenance. Sugar had disappeared entirely by March. The monthly meat ration had shrunk to 100 grams per person, barely enough for a single meal. Most families saved it for Sundays, the one day they could pretend life was normal. Now, standing in a Kentucky mess hall with more food on her tray than she'd seen in months, every belief Emma held about America was crumbling. The transport ship had departed from Le Havre on October 23rd. 58 German women had crossed the Atlantic, convinced they were sailing toward brutality and starvation. Emma had written final letters to her family, certain she'd never see them again. Third day at Camp Ridge brought breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter, and real coffee. Emma sat staring at more food than she'd seen since before the war. Her stomach, shrunken from months of near starvation, could barely hold a full meal. Charlotte Fisher pushed her eggs around her plate, unable to eat. The 25-year-old from Berlin had received a Red Cross letter the day before. Her mother's careful handwriting described surviving on potato peels and cabbage leaves. Her younger brother, only 14, had been conscripted into the Volkssturm and sent to defend Germany's eastern territories. The family was eating 1 meal every 2 days. Now Charlotte sat before more food than her entire family would see in a week, and the abundance felt like betrayal. Greta noticed Charlotte's untouched plate and understood immediately. "Not eating won't feed your family," she whispered in German. "It only wastes what's been given." But logic didn't ease the emotional burden. 31-year-old Elizabeth Wagner had taken a different approach. She ate everything placed before her with methodical determination. When younger women expressed guilt, she told them bluntly that their suffering wouldn't alleviate anyone else's hunger. Their deaths from refusing food wouldn't save a single German child. They had a duty to survive, to bear witness, to eventually return home and rebuild. Yet even Elizabeth's practical philosophy couldn't entirely silence the voice whispering that accepting American food was moral surrender. Every bite felt like admission that everything they'd believed about their enemies might be wrong. Week 2 brought an incident Captain Dorothy Brennan would later describe as complete emotional breakdown. It began with something absurdly simple: real butter, yellow and creamy, placed in small dishes on each table. Not margarine, but actual butter made from cream. Greta was first to break. She spread butter on her toast, took one bite, then placed her face in her hands and began sobbing with such intensity her entire body shook. Within moments, crying spread through the mess hall like wildfire. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war was over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. For the 58 German women at Camp Woodland Ridge, the end brought not relief, but profound uncertainty. Captain Brennan announced they would be repatriated to Germany as soon as transportation could be arranged. The word hung in the air. It meant going home. But home to what? Letters over past months painted pictures of devastation. Cities in ruins. Families scattered or dead. A country struggling with starvation worse than anything they'd experienced before capture. Emma thought about Dresden, wondering if her family's apartment still stood. Allied bombing had intensified in the war's final months. She had no recent letters, no way of knowing if her mother and sister had survived. Before repatriation began, Corporal Mitchell organized a special Sunday dinner. The meal was extraordinary: roasted chicken with herb stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, glazed carrots, green beans with almonds, homemade rolls with butter, and apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Before serving, Corporal Mitchell spoke to them. "When you first arrived 6 months ago, I decided to feed you the same way I'd feed my own family. Not because rules required it, but because how we treat people defines who we are. When you return to Germany, I want you to remember that America fed you not because we had to, but because we chose to."